From the moment you wake up in the morning and decide whether to hit snooze or get out of bed, you are confronted with a question that has fascinated philosophers for centuries. Do you truly have free will? Are you in control of your choices, or are they shaped by forces outside your awareness, genetics, upbringing, environment, or even fate? The question of free will is not abstract curiosity. It lies at the core of how we see ourselves, how we assign responsibility, and how we find meaning in life. On one hand, we feel free. When you choose your breakfast, or decide to go for a walk, it feels like those choices arise from within you. No one forced your hand. You made the decision. Yet, when we look deeper, things become less certain. Science tells us that our brains are shaped by biology, chemistry, and past experience. Psychology reveals how unconscious drives influence us more than we realize. And philosophy has long debated whether freedom is even possible in a universe ruled by cause and effect. This tension between feeling free and doubting freedom has given rise to one of the most enduring debates in philosophy. Thinkers across history have wrestled with it. If everything has a cause, then aren't our choices predetermined by prior events? If so, is free will nothing but an illusion? Or could it be that human freedom coexists with determinism in a way we simply don't yet understand? Let's start in ancient Greece. The Stoics believed the universe was governed by fate, a chain of cause and effect stretching from the stars to human actions. Yet they still spoke of freedom, not the power to change external events, but the inner freedom to respond wisely to whatever happens. For them, free will was about aligning with nature, accepting necessity, and exercising rational judgment within those bounds. To the Stoics, your will is free not because you control everything, but because you control yourself. Centuries later, Augustine, a Christian philosopher, struggled with this question in the context of sin and divine grace. If God is all-powerful and knows everything in advance, do humans really choose? Augustine argued that free will exists, but it is wounded by our tendency toward selfishness. Divine grace, in his view, restores the ability to freely choose the good. Already we see how free will was not just a theoretical puzzle, but also tied to ethics, religion, and responsibility. In the Enlightenment, philosophers like David Hume offered a different perspective. Hume suggested that free will is compatible with determinism. He argued that freedom does not require absolute independence from causes, but simply the ability to act according to one's own desires and motivations. If you act in line with your will, even if that will itself has causes, then you are free in the only sense that matters. This view, known as compatibilism, remains influential today. But not everyone agrees. Thinkers like Arthur Schopenhauer and later, hard determinists, argued that the feeling of freedom is an illusion. Schopenhauer famously said, "Man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills." You might choose chocolate over vanilla, but did you choose to prefer chocolate in the first place? If not, is your choice truly free? According to this view, freedom is an illusion generated by consciousness, while behind the scenes, everything is determined. Modern neuroscience has added fuel to this debate. In the 1980s, experiments by Benjamin Libet showed that brain activity predicting a movement occurs milliseconds before the person reports making the conscious decision to act. Some interpreted this as proof that the brain decides before the conscious self does, undermining free will. However, others argue that these experiments are limited. They only measure trivial choices, like when to press a button, and don't capture the complexity of real-life decisions. So where does this leave us? On one extreme, some claim that free will is impossible in a deterministic universe. On the other, some say freedom is an illusion, but a necessary one, an illusion that gives coherence to morality, law, and society. In between, compatibilists argue that freedom doesn't require metaphysical independence, only the ability to act in accordance with one's reasoning, values, and desires. But let's pause here. When you think about your own life, the abstract arguments fade, and the question becomes personal. Do you feel that your choices are free? Or do you feel constrained by habits, fears, circumstances, and influences beyond your control? Reflecting on this, you might notice that freedom is not something absolute, but something lived. Some days you feel more free than others. Some choices feel authentic, others compelled. And maybe that is the essence of the debate. Free will might not be a black or white matter, but a spectrum. You may not control the circumstances into which you are born, or the raw impulses that arise within you. But you can reflect, deliberate, and shape your responses. That ability, however limited, may be what we call free will. The question then shifts. Instead of asking, do we have free will or not, we might ask, how free can we become? And this turns the philosophical debate into a practical one. By becoming more aware of our influences, more conscious of our patterns, and more deliberate in our actions, we expand the circle of our freedom. This way of thinking transforms free will from a distant metaphysical puzzle into a living project. Freedom is not merely something we possess, but something we cultivate. Every act of self-awareness, every pause before reacting, every choice aligned with your deeper values is an exercise of freedom. And so, the question of free will leads us back to responsibility. If you can cultivate your freedom, then you are responsible not only for what you do, but for how much awareness and effort you bring to your choices. Even if ultimate metaphysical freedom is impossible, lived freedom is within reach, and it shapes the quality of your life. As we continue, we'll explore this tension further, seeing how modern thinkers, scientists, and everyday experience can help us better understand one of life's deepest questions: does free will truly exist? If we take a step back and look at the bigger picture, the free will debate is not only about philosophy or science. It also shapes how we build societies, how we write laws, and how we treat one another. Imagine a world where free will is completely denied. If no one truly chooses their actions, how could we hold people accountable for crime or praise them for achievements? Justice systems around the globe are founded on the assumption that people can make choices and must answer for them. Remove that, and the very structure of responsibility begins to wobble. And yet, there's a counterpoint. If people act only from circumstances they didn't choose, such as their upbringing, trauma, or neurological makeup, then maybe punishment should give way to understanding. Maybe instead of asking, who deserves blame, we should ask, how can we change conditions so fewer harmful actions occur? This shift could lead to a more compassionate world, where we treat destructive behavior not as a result of evil free choices, but as a result of conditions we can work to improve. But humans are complicated. Even if you accept determinism intellectually, it's nearly impossible to live as though free will doesn't exist. Every day, you wake up and face choices: what to eat, who to call, what to work on. You feel responsible for these decisions. You feel the weight of possibility. It is in this lived experience that the debate reveals its paradox. We cannot escape acting as if free will is real, even if reason tells us otherwise. The existentialists confronted this tension directly. Jean-Paul Sartre declared that human beings are condemned to be free. By this, he meant that even in a world without God, without ultimate guarantees, each person must confront the radical responsibility of choosing. No excuses, no blaming fate. To exist is to choose, and to choose is to carry the burden of shaping your life. For Sartre, denying free will was not an option, because the act of denial itself is a choice. You cannot escape it. This radical freedom, however, can be terrifying. If you are fully responsible for your choices, then you cannot hide behind destiny or circumstance. Sartre saw this as both a curse and a gift. It forces you to confront yourself honestly. What kind of life are you creating? Are you living authentically, or are you hiding behind excuses? In this sense, free will is less about metaphysical debates and more about courage, the courage to take ownership of your existence. But is Sartre right? Modern psychology paints a more nuanced picture. Studies on behavior reveal that many of our actions are guided by unconscious biases, social pressures, and automatic habits. For example, experiments show that people are far more influenced by context than they realize. The presence of authority figures, group pressure, or even something as simple as the smell of fresh cookies can affect choices. This suggests that while we may feel free, a large portion of what we do is nudged by forces beneath awareness. So where does that leave free will? Some argue that true freedom requires not total independence, but the ability to step back, reflect, and override these unconscious nudges. This idea is supported by mindfulness practices, which train people to notice impulses without immediately acting on them. For instance, you might feel the urge to lash out in anger, but through awareness, you can pause, reflect, and choose a different response. That ability to step between impulse and action may be the clearest form of freedom we can cultivate. This connects beautifully with Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, who wrote, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom." Frankl did not deny that external conditions and suffering can be overwhelming. But he believed that even in the darkest circumstances, humans can find meaning through how they respond. This perspective reframes free will not as abstract independence, but as the concrete practice of meaning-making. Now, let's consider how technology enters this conversation. In the digital age, algorithms increasingly shape our choices, from what we see on social media to which ads influence our desires. If your online experience is carefully curated by unseen systems, to what extent are your decisions still yours? Are you freely choosing to buy that product, or did an algorithm nudge you so subtly you didn't even notice? Some fear that this erosion of awareness reduces human freedom, creating a world where people believe they are choosing, but in reality, their paths are being engineered. Yet, once again, awareness becomes the key. If you understand how influence works, you can reclaim agency. For example, being mindful of your media diet, questioning your impulses before acting, and intentionally creating habits that align with your values, these are modern expressions of free will. In a world of increasing manipulation, freedom is not something given, but something fought for. And this brings us to another layer of the debate: even if free will is limited, do we lose anything by believing in it? Psychologists have found that when people stop believing in free will, they often become less motivated and more likely to act unethically. In one study, participants who read texts denying free will were more likely to cheat on a test afterward. Belief in freedom, it seems, strengthens our sense of responsibility. Illusion or not, it has real-world consequences. This raises an intriguing possibility: maybe the truth of free will is less important than its usefulness. Perhaps free will functions as what philosophers call a regulative idea. Even if it cannot be proven, it guides human behavior in beneficial ways. Believing you are free encourages growth, responsibility, and creativity. Believing you are nothing more than a machine of causes risks apathy and despair. In this way, the debate is not only about what is real, but about what vision of humanity we choose to live by. Still, we cannot ignore the intellectual challenge. To many, it feels dishonest to cling to free will if determinism is true. But perhaps the resolution lies in expanding our understanding of causality. The universe may indeed be governed by laws, but within that framework, complex systems like human beings can generate new forms of order and novelty. Some philosophers argue that freedom is not about breaking the chain of cause and effect, but about being part of a system that can reflect, learn, and adapt in ways that rocks or rivers cannot. If so, free will may not mean escaping causality but expressing it in uniquely human ways. You are not free from the web of causes, but you are free within it, because you can understand, reinterpret, and redirect the influences acting upon you. This vision does not deny science, nor does it dismiss the feeling of freedom. Instead, it integrates them into a richer view of what it means to be human. And so, we circle back to the original question, does free will exist? Perhaps the best answer is that free will exists to the degree that we claim it. The more conscious you become of your influences, the more deliberate you are in shaping your responses, the more freedom you cultivate. Absolute freedom may be beyond reach, but meaningful freedom is something you can build moment by moment. This transforms the question from a puzzle into a practice. It is less about solving a mystery of the universe, and more about asking yourself each day, am I living freely? Am I acting from awareness, or from conditioning? Am I choosing my path, or simply walking the one laid before me? If we look even deeper into this question, it becomes clear that free will is not only about the grand decisions of life, like which career to pursue or who to marry, but also about the smallest, most ordinary moments. Consider how often in a day you act on autopilot. You drive to work without remembering each turn, you scroll your phone without thinking, you respond with habits of speech and body language you didn't consciously choose. These micro-actions reveal how much of life is lived beneath awareness. Does that mean free will is an illusion? Not necessarily. It may mean that freedom is less about what happens automatically, and more about the moments when you interrupt the automatic. Think of freedom as a window that opens whenever awareness breaks through habit. You may live much of your day on autopilot, but when you pause, reflect, and decide to change, even in a small way, you step into freedom. Choosing to put down your phone, choosing to listen deeply to someone, choosing to forgive instead of resent, each of these moments is an act of reclaiming your agency. The fact that such windows exist suggests that free will, however limited, is not gone. It flickers alive whenever we wake up to the present moment. But of course, not all choices are equal. Philosopher Harry Frankfurt once proposed a famous idea: true freedom is not simply the ability to do what you want, but the ability to want what you want. In other words, freedom is about alignment between higher and lower desires. Imagine you crave junk food but also want to live a healthy life. If you act on the craving, you are not fully free, you are enslaved by impulse. If you act on the deeper desire to be healthy, you are exercising freedom. For Frankfurt, this distinction reveals that free will is not just about actions, but about which desires we identify with as truly ours. This resonates with many spiritual traditions, which teach that freedom is found not in indulging every urge, but in mastering the self. Buddhism, for example, sees much of human suffering as arising from craving and attachment. The practice of mindfulness and meditation is a way of loosening the grip of impulse, creating space for wiser choices. In this sense, freedom is not the absence of causes, but the cultivation of inner clarity. By quieting the noise of craving, you begin to act from a place of deeper awareness. Now, let's connect this with the modern world. In a culture flooded with distractions, advertisements, and social pressures, the challenge of free will becomes more urgent. Companies spend billions learning how to capture attention and influence behavior. Notifications are designed to trigger dopamine, creating habits of checking and scrolling. In such a landscape, freedom is not guaranteed. It becomes an act of resistance. When you choose to turn off notifications, when you set boundaries with technology, when you deliberately choose how to spend your time instead of letting others choose for you, you are not only exercising free will, you are protecting it. Some philosophers argue that this protection of freedom is the real test of our age. In the past, freedom was threatened by kings, dictators, or external control. Today, freedom is threatened by subtle manipulation, by psychological hooks that bypass conscious choice. The result is not chains around your wrists, but chains around your attention. If attention is the currency of freedom, then reclaiming it is the highest act of will. But let's pause to consider another angle. What if free will is less about choosing between options and more about creating new possibilities? Most debates focus on whether you could have done otherwise in a given situation. But creativity reveals another dimension. When an artist paints something new, or an inventor creates a device, or a person forgives in a situation where revenge is expected, something emerges that did not exist before. Could this act of creation be the deepest expression of free will? Not just picking between doors, but building a door where none existed. This idea points to a richer vision of human freedom. Rather than obsessing over whether each decision was predetermined, we might ask, how do humans expand possibility itself? Through imagination, reflection, and courage, we generate options that the past alone could not dictate. The act of envisioning a future that is not yet real, and then working to make it real, may be one of the strongest arguments for free will. And yet, the mystery persists. For every inspiring vision of freedom, there is the nagging voice of determinism. Neuroscience shows us brain patterns that precede conscious thought. Genetics reveals predispositions that shape personality. Social science uncovers how culture molds values and preferences. Is freedom simply the illusion that arises when complex causes become too tangled for us to trace? Are we nothing but the unfolding of chemical and historical processes? Here lies the tension that makes the debate so enduring. Both sides have truth. Determinism highlights the undeniable fact that we are shaped by forces beyond control. Free will highlights the undeniable experience that we can reflect, resist, and redirect. Neither perspective can be dismissed entirely. The challenge is to hold them together, to accept that we are both constrained and free, determined and yet capable of choice. Perhaps this is why many thinkers have turned to a middle path, compatibilism. This view does not require us to escape determinism, but instead redefines freedom as the capacity to act according to one's own reasoning and values. Imagine a person who refrains from stealing, not because they are forced, but because they recognize it goes against their principles. Even if their principles are shaped by prior causes, their action still expresses their authentic self. Freedom, then, is not about breaking the chain of causes, but about being a link in the chain that reflects and endorses its own reasons. This may sound abstract, but in daily life, it is quite concrete. When you act out of alignment with your values, you feel regret, shame, or frustration. When you act in alignment, you feel integrity, pride, or peace. These feelings suggest that freedom is deeply tied to selfhood. It is not about metaphysical independence, but about coherence between who you are and what you do. In this way, free will is woven into the fabric of meaning. And so, the question of free will is also the question of identity. Who are you, really? Are you a bundle of causes, or are you a conscious agent capable of shaping a life? Maybe the truest answer is that you are both. You inherit influences, but you also transform them. You are shaped by forces, but you also shape in return. Every choice, every act of reflection, every step of resistance is a way of writing yourself into the story of the world. The deeper we go, the more we realize that the debate is not just philosophical but existential. It is about how we see ourselves, how we live, and how we take responsibility. Whether or not free will exists in some ultimate sense, the decision to act as though it does may be the most important choice of all. As we reach the heart of this exploration, let us pause for a moment. The question of free will is not only one of logic, science, or philosophy. It is also a mirror in which we see our deepest hopes and fears reflected. To ask whether we are free is to ask whether our lives matter, whether our choices shape destiny, or whether we are merely drifting in a current we cannot alter. The weight of this question is why it has endured for millennia. Consider how different answers change the way we live. If you believe free will is an illusion, life can feel heavy, as though you are watching a film whose ending has already been written. If you believe free will is real, life feels open, dynamic, and unpredictable. Between these two visions lies not just a debate but a lived experience that colors every decision, every regret, and every hope. Take a moment to reflect on your own life. Think of a decision that changed your trajectory, a relationship you entered, a job you accepted, a place you moved to. Was that moment free? Did you truly choose it? Or was it the inevitable unfolding of causes set in motion long before? For some, the idea that it was inevitable brings comfort. It relieves the burden of regret. For others, the thought is suffocating, as though their agency has been stolen. Which response resonates more deeply with you reveals much about how you see the world. And yet, whether free will is real or not, humans seem wired to live as if it is. From the moment a child learns the word choice, they begin to feel the thrill of possibility. As adults, this sense of possibility fuels our ambition, our art, our moral systems. If freedom were nothing but an illusion, why would it be so central to our experience? Perhaps, even if it is an illusion, it is one so deeply embedded in consciousness that it functions as reality for us. This raises a provocative thought: maybe the debate over free will cannot be solved in the abstract. Maybe it is a question that can only be answered in the way we live. If you live passively, accepting every influence without question, free will diminishes. If you live reflectively, choosing with awareness, free will expands. It may be that free will is not a thing you possess or lack, but a capacity you practice. Let's return to the Stoics for a moment. They did not waste time arguing about whether every event was predetermined. For them, fate was real. What mattered was how one responded. Epictetus, once a slave, became a teacher of freedom precisely because he realized that inner freedom cannot be taken away. You may not control your body, your wealth, or your circumstances, but you can control your judgments, your values, your responses. In this sense, free will is always available, even in chains. Contrast this with the determinism of modern science. Genes, environment, and brain chemistry all shape us in profound ways. Yet, even within these constraints, human beings surprise. Identical twins raised in the same environment do not live identical lives. People with similar hardships often choose radically different paths. Determinism explains much, but not everything. The spark of unpredictability, whether you call it freedom or complexity, remains. Now let's imagine a future where neuroscience grows so advanced that it can predict your decisions with high accuracy. Would that destroy the concept of free will? Or would you still feel free, even as a machine predicts your actions? Some argue that prediction does not negate freedom. Just because someone can foresee your choice doesn't mean you didn't choose it. After all, if your friend knows you well enough to predict you'll order coffee instead of tea, does that make the choice less yours? Prediction might not erase freedom, it might only reveal patterns in how freedom is expressed. But let us not lose ourselves in abstractions. The practical question remains, how do you live as a free human being? You start by cultivating awareness. Notice when impulses arise, when habits pull you, when pressures surround you. Then create the pause, that sacred moment between stimulus and response. In that pause lies your power. This is where philosophy moves from theory to practice. The debate about free will may never end, but your ability to live with greater freedom begins the moment you step into awareness. Think also of responsibility. Even if freedom is limited, you are still responsible for how you respond. Responsibility is the bridge between determinism and freedom. You may not choose all the conditions of your life, but you choose what you make of them. This is why stories of resilience inspire us, because they reveal the human power to rise above circumstance, to carve meaning where none was given. And so, the question, does free will exist, transforms into another, how will you live, given what you know? You may never resolve the metaphysical debate. But you can choose how to orient yourself toward it. You can choose to cultivate awareness, to act with intention, to align your life with your values. In doing so, you live as if you are free, and perhaps that is the most meaningful freedom of all. To live this way is not easy. It requires vigilance against distraction, courage in the face of fear, and honesty about your deepest motivations. But in the struggle to live freely, you affirm your dignity as a human being. You affirm that even if the universe is a vast web of causes, within that web there is a spark that reflects, chooses, and creates. That spark is what makes you who you are. So, does free will exist? Perhaps the most honest answer is that we do not know with certainty. But in the space between knowing and not knowing, there is room to live as though it does. And in that act, freedom becomes less of a theory and more of a lived reality. And here is where I leave you with a reflection: the next time you face a decision, big or small, pause for a moment. Ask yourself, what would it mean to choose freely right now? What would it mean to act not from impulse or pressure, but from awareness and value? That single pause, repeated again and again, may be the truest expression of free will you will ever know. And if you found value in this reflection, remember this: freedom is not something we discover once and for all. It is a path we walk daily. That is why on the Thinking Path, we explore questions like these every week, so that together, we can grow wiser, freer, and more alive. Thank you for watching this video. If it made you see life differently, subscribe to the Thinking Path so you don't miss the next one. New videos packed with timeless wisdom will drop every week. And I'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts below. Do you believe free will exists, or do you think it's an illusion? I'll pin the most thought-provoking comment. And don't forget, there's a free gift waiting for you in the description, so check out the description of course after watching this video. We are building a tribe of thinkers from around the world, and your presence makes this journey richer. Welcome to the family, and I'll see you on the next one.